Modern life has become so disjointed. We have lost our connection with nature, with the wider human family, and even with our own selves. Knowledge is segmented in schools, departments are segmented at work, countries and cultures are kept from forming a deeper understanding of each other. Yet it wasn't always this way. Various traditions worldwide had a more holistic worldview, whereby everything was seen in the context of everything else. Connections were sought and made. Perspective was possible. Two leading proponents of this holistic worldview, Richard Dunne from the Harmony Project and Revd Dr Keith Eyeons, author of the Theology of Everything, will now explore how we might benefit from looking at the world in this way.
Hello and welcome to another session at this 2021 Polymath Festival. My name is Nizam Uddin and I am thrilled to be moderating this session on how we move towards a holistic worldview. The title of this session very much encapsulates the essence of the Polymath Festival, which has been so expertly curated by the DaVinci network, which is to advance towards a world where we break down the silos within our minds and across society. The festival has explored this throughout the past 10 days with a number of sessions, from interrogating the false dichotomy of art and science through to exploring the multidimensional approaches to design. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by two exceptional minds and experts who, through their work and their lived experiences, have ventured towards a holistic worldview. The plan is for me to introduce them both first and then hand over to them for their interventions, followed by a conversation. So please do contribute, engage, send in your questions, your thoughts, your musings, your immediate responses. We'd love to hear from you. Revd Dr Keith Eyeons is a fellow of Downing College at the University of Cambridge, where he is the college's chaplain and the director of studies for theology, religion, and philosophy of religion. Keith's work in the college includes running the college chaplain, providing pastoral care and support for students, teaching, and various other roles. Through an initial fascination with astrophysics, Keith's journey to faith was inspired by the immensity of space and has led him to explore how theology can connect with all areas of knowledge, culminating in his award-nominated book, The Theology of Everything. And for those of you who are near Downing College on a Thursday, during non-COVID times, of course, it is rumored that Thursdays are when Keith can be found serving large numbers of free donuts to his students and maybe you. We also have Richard Dunne, who has 30 years of teaching experience and was head teacher of an Ofsted grade outstanding school for 18 years. His work in redesigning a curriculum around nature's principle of harmony has already begun inspiring the next generation of teachers and children, with the approach to learning already in place in several schools across the UK. Richard believes passionately that the best way for children to be motivated in their learning is when it makes sense to them and when they have a key role to play. Through combining core skills to purposeful inquiries of learning, the children start to develop their own vision of how they want to see the world, and just as importantly, what they can do to make it happen. Keith, Richard, really thrilled and delighted to have you both with us. Thank you for joining us, and really excited about this conversation and hearing about what you have to say. Keith, if I may go over to you first.
Thank you, Nizam. Thank you for your welcome. I'm delighted to take part in this Polymath Festival and to discuss the idea of a holistic worldview. I've always had the kind of mind that wanted to ask the biggest questions I could. And for me, that's meant a journey through studies, including physics and history and philosophy and theology. It seems very important to me to try to fit the pieces together and to look for a bigger picture. So for me, the idea of being a polymath points to the even greater question of developing a polymathic worldview, a holistic worldview. Well, behind me is Leonardo da Vinci's famous drawing of the Vitruvian Man, which features on the cover of Wachos's wonderful book. Leonardo's vast achievements included painting the Mona Lisa, designing a helicopter, and studying the anatomy of the human heart. He succeeded in extending the realm of human knowledge on multiple frontiers, which today would be handled by completely separate professions. And so he's the archetypal Renaissance man, a true genius. But he was helped by the fact that he lived in a society which had an inherently polymathic worldview, a worldview far more holistic than we usually find today. In the Renaissance, people had a great confidence that reality as a whole was coherent, intelligible, and meaningful. They felt that they were at home in the center of a divinely ordered, purposeful cosmos. And so they took great delight in the spiritual quest for harmony and interconnectedness in all truth. it was much less surprising to them that someone who understood the mathematical principles of engineering would also know how to make a painting look beautiful. Aesthetics, geometry, physics, spirituality, ethics, love, astronomy, and music were all closely interrelated in their vision of the world. Holding that worldview together was a theology, a Christian theology that was very deeply informed by the best of the philosophy of the ancient Greeks. And Greek philosophy itself had been very much about everything: the love of wisdom, the study of nature, the life of virtue, the ascent of the soul. Islamic thinkers had added to this ancient tradition as it had been handed on through the Middle Ages, and we can find examples of holistic worldviews among all the historic cultures of the world. So in the context of the Renaissance, having someone who painted religious and secular art, designed helicopters, and studied anatomy would have seemed a bit less surprising than it does today. Well, Leonardo's drawing of the Vitruvian Man has become the best known symbol of a belief that was widespread in the Renaissance, the idea that a human being is a microcosm. It suggests that each of us is a lesser world which mirrors the wider structures of the cosmos. It suggests that universal principles of mathematics and geometry are reflected in the structures of the human body, as the picture shows. And this microcosm idea also suggests that a human being is both physical and spiritual. We each have a physical body which works in the same way as the physical world around us, and we have a spiritual nature which reflects something of a divine intelligence, love, and consciousness. So the Renaissance held this very positive view of humanity's place in the cosmos, and that view is very confidently polymathic. It regards us as beings whose entire nature reflects the whole of reality. It gives us a sense that all of our faculties are important responses to aspects of that reality. And those faculties include our physical senses, together with our abilities to make scientific measurements, to think rationally, to love, to empathize, and to perceive goodness, to enjoy beauty, and to seek meaning and purpose. All of those insights are important, and all of them are engaging with reality. So this is a view which lends itself to a unified, harmonious understanding of all human knowledge and experience, a holistic view which is inherently polymathic. Now, we've largely lost that holistic approach. We're today usually much more wary of talking about our place in the cosmos. What's happened to change things so much, we might wonder? Well, of course, it's been an eventful 500 years. There's been the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and vast social and political changes. But let me draw out two themes. Firstly, the very tangible success of science and technology. The people of the Renaissance already believed in a well-ordered cosmos structured by one divine mind in which principles of mathematics and geometry were at work. But since then, the search for those principles has been so successful that they've often eclipsed everything else. Uncovering more of the laws of physics and developing our skills in engineering led to a very mechanical view of the cosmos, where everything began to seem like a giant clockwork mechanism ticking away perfectly, or a giant steam engine offering us forces to harness, or a great mine ready to be stripped of its raw materials to fuel our industry and commerce. And all of this began to seem more and more impersonal and meaningless. People began to lose touch with nature and beauty, trapped within vast industrial cities. Spirituality began to be squeezed out. And by then, we also knew that we weren't physically at the center of the cosmos, but were on one world among many. So reality began to seem to be all about empty spaces and atoms and forces and impersonal machinery obeying mathematical laws. And so the great questions of human experience, meaning and purpose and beauty and goodness and love were increasingly cast adrift and lost their traditional anchors, leaving us struggling to know how to talk about them together or starting to find them absurd. At the same time, the institutions of our world began to be more and more fragmented. Lots of new specialists emerged and started building their own empires in their own domains. So in the 19th century, universities started having physics departments and chemistry departments and philosophy departments and art departments and so on. And by then, we'd all become experts, each defending our own little professional strongholds, each fighting our own little career battles to rise up within fields which became narrower and narrower. Well, can we find our way forward to a more holistic view? I believe we can. It means taking science very seriously. while recognizing that it doesn't actually imply a mechanical and impersonal view of reality. Recovering a sense of the importance of all of our experiences, so that ideas of beauty, wonder, goodness, meaning, purpose, empathy, community, and love are all linked to the same picture. In fact, I think that more recent science can point towards a new and deeper sense of human dignity and of our place in the cosmos. Quantum mechanics has suggested that there's a vital role for intelligent observers in the functioning of matter. Things fall into place and become real when they're observed. And the whole long history of the cosmos is an extraordinary set of constructive processes leading from hydrogen atoms to intelligent life and civilization, shaped by laws of physics which seem to be precisely fine-tuned in a way which allows that to happen. And despite all the wonders we've seen through our telescopes, we have found nothing more complex and amazing and sophisticated than a single human child. Our intelligence and our consciousness and our civilization is the most advanced set of phenomena we know to have emerged within the universe. Within that, the trickiest and most wonderful phenomenon of all is the growth of love and community. And that's not something that can be engineered or forced to happen. It involves risk and vulnerability and freedom. It's messy and precarious, and often we avoid it or hide in our little cliques and factions. But this reality we inhabit seems to inspire us towards experiences that we find meaningful, caring for others, building community, developing civilization and knowledge, learning to embrace all that is true and good and beautiful. So in this picture of reality I'm offering, the drama of the development of human personality and community is immensely significant. The ways we grow through the day-to-day struggles of life and all the dilemmas we face are all very important. I think we know that instinctively. That's why we love to explore those themes in the stories we tell, whether they're real or fictional, whether they're sacred or secular. We love detailed narratives about adventures, conflicts, and moral dilemmas. We're fascinated by accounts of how people's characters are formed. And that explains the significance of our love of novels, plays, literature, and history. Those aren't just some whimsical set of hobbies. I think they're closely connected with the very highest functions of the universe. So is beauty, the beauty we find in music, in nature, in art, in each other. There's a potential for delight, wonder, communication, and attraction in the cosmos, which we can enjoy and add to with our own creativity. So I've been weaving together themes from what we would today call spirituality, science, and the arts and humanities. I think it all belongs together in one holistic worldview. As a Christian theologian, there's much more I could say about how that can work within an understanding of the creative love of God. But I believe that I'm talking about experiences that are universal. And my main point today is that reality is inherently hospitable to polymaths. Scientific rationality, community, aesthetics, a sense of meaning and purpose, an enjoyment of the beauty of nature, poetry, drama, it all interconnects. It really does. And it's a joy to share today with others who are keen to explore it together.
Keith, thank you so much. What a fascinating start. And I think you said it's been a busy 500 years, but I think you've done a fantastic job in summarizing that for us in a very short 10 minutes. So thank you very much. Richard, I think I neglected to mention that you are, of course, the project lead for the Harmony project in your introduction. So really looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you, Nizam, and thank you for your words, Keith. What a fascinating introduction that was. And just before I share some thoughts from my perspective, I'm particularly drawn to three words that you highlighted in what you shared there. The first, this word of beauty. And coming from an education background, I wonder what would happen if we made beauty our goal. We see in the natural world this extraordinary beauty that comes to fruition through natural processes. And if we created this sense of beauty as something that we work towards in music, in performance, in art, and so on, in the way that we share our learning, what a wonderful thing that would be. The second word was this focus on the child. And I think what I will bring to this conversation, hopefully, is looking at this through the lens of the child and how children and the way that they learn to understand and make sense of the world is so central to how we can create this more holistic worldview. And I love your ongoing reference to this word geometry and the sacred order of life and of nature, and how if we help our young people to understand these extraordinary patterns, repeating patterns of nature, and the beauty that they create, what an interesting way it would be for us to start to evolve a different worldview. So let me build on what you've said there, Keith. And as you say, Nizam, I am Director of Education of the Harmony Project, and it's an education charity whose aim is to transition education towards a much more holistic, joined up way of learning, and indeed way of learning to see the world. And this work of the Harmony Project has been inspired by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and the book that he wrote about 10 years ago now, entitled Harmony, A New Way of Looking at Our World. And of course, it wasn't a new way of looking at the world. It was just a reminder of how things are and how we need to reconnect to that understanding, the understanding that you highlighted earlier from many of the ancient traditions. We see it still in indigenous people today, this deep wisdom of how the world, the cosmos works, and how we can live and work in a way that is integrated into that. So my background is very much from the other end. It's working in primary education, working with children, and that's what I've done for around 30 years. And I've observed that when learning works best, it's because it's joined up. It's joined up around a project or a theme where subject skills and knowledge are practiced and applied in the context of that project. So it has this lovely sense of wholeness. And I remember asking teachers, what does this word learning mean? And one of them said, it's about making sense of things. So if we can make sense of things, see how they work together, and develop learning around that, then we hopefully will start to move ourselves towards this holistic worldview. And I think what that requires is for us to do learning almost back to front. We often, if we are setting out as teachers a timetable of what we're going to deliver over a week or a term, we'll look at subject-specific content and we'll prepare it separately. Whereas actually, if we say, what's the theme here? What's the inquiry question that we're going to explore together? And how can we integrate all the different elements of skills and knowledge in relation to subjects to that, to really bring it to life? And of course, there are discrete elements within subject areas that may need their own time. But actually through that process, we start to link learning together to see this network of interrelated experiences that help us build a picture and an understanding of how everything works. And we really do learn to make sense of the world. And I think this is exactly what we need to be doing right now. And what we're getting from our young people today is that that's what they want. There's a fantastic organization out there at the moment called Teach the Future. And it's a student-based body. And they're asking for their learning to be interrelated and looking forward to what kind of world are they going to be part of? What kind of world are they going to create? So we have an education system at the moment that I would say is still very subject siloed, disconnected, and this lack of joined up thinking around how we learn has, of course, led to so many of the challenges and concerns we face today in relation to climate change, to biodiversity loss, even the COVID pandemic, and the social aspects as well. So it seems like we haven't properly thought through the impact or the consequences of what we are doing. And we haven't valued this idea of wholeness and things working together. I remember talking to someone who's very involved in the global picture of sustainability. And I asked him, what do we need to do to be more sustainable, to live more sustainably? And he said, we need to develop in our young people a systems view of the world, to see things as they relate to one another. So coming back to this idea of harmony, from my perspective, underpinning this process of learning are what we would call principles of harmony. And these principles or laws of nature teach us how the natural world works according to principles that enable it to be healthy, sustainable, and resilient. And natural systems are not segmented or siloed. They work in a much more holistic way. And there's this lovely link between something being healthy when it's whole and being whole when it's healthy. And the lovely idea that health and whole come from the same place. So just to briefly give you a sense of that, these principles might include interdependence, seeing how everything's connected together, cycles and understanding the cyclical nature of life, and this model for any sustainable system or practice, the principle of diversity and the importance of diversity in giving a system or an organization strength, and the lovely questions that come out from that around how do we value diversity in one another, in nature, in our perspectives and ways of seeing the world, and really appreciating what those perspectives bring in terms of a richness and often a real goodness too. The principle of adaptation, both looking at nature and its extraordinary evolutionary processes that have enabled it to be so adapted to its place to survive and to thrive. And of course, as we've noticed so much recently, how we too need to adapt to the situation that we face. And short term in terms of the pandemic, but longer term, where are we going into the future? And this other principle of oneness or wholeness, and seeing that we are nature, we are part of this whole, not separate from it. So 2 final points just to add here. One is that I spoke to a delightful man recently called Jim Garrison. He runs an online university called Ubiquity University. And he said to me at the start of our conversation, if we don't understand and start with the fundamental principles of life, we will go astray. So in exploring those principles and understanding what they mean, we can create our own worldviews and our own way of seeing the world that really can make sense for us. So it seems that if we're going to create this holistic worldview, we would do well to reframe our learning around this much more integrated approach that enables our students, indeed all of us, to see the parts coming together as a whole. And my final story is I spoke to one of my daughters not long ago about her maths learning. And she was in secondary school, and she told me that she'd been learning about the Fibonacci sequence and linking into Italy and Leonardo da Vinci and Fibonacci. And it was a math sequence of numbers. And I said to her, did you look at this Fibonacci sequence as a pattern? Because it's a beautiful spiral pattern that we see in nature. And it's a pattern of growth. And she said she hadn't realized that. So I said, well, just curl up your index finger and you can start to see this pattern at work here. And of course, we see it in so many other ways, in curled up ferns, in a nautilus shell in the ocean, and in the spiral form of cloud formation. So this lovely connection that geometry gives us between seeing our relationship with the wider world. And I concluded our conversation by asking her, what are you doing in arts? Because there's such a lovely link here between your maths learning and some artistic expression of this Fibonacci sequence and spiral. And she said to me, we're doing pop art. And it just felt like a beautiful way of showing that actually there are so many ways in which we can link things together and make them make sense. And yet we're not necessarily seeing them. So yes, so I think if we can find a way of educating in this much more holistic way and underpin this approach with these eternal universal principles of harmony that exist in nature, then it will enable us to live in ways that put this holistic worldview and the idea of wholeness at the heart of everything we do. And I think if we're to live sustainably, this way of learning will be essential to achieving that.
Richard, thank you so much. I think perfect complementary intervention from what we heard from Keith. And I think what's interesting about both of your remarks was, and I think this goes back to harmony, you said it's a new way of looking at the world, which of course ultimately is a renewed way of looking at the world, is how the world looked at itself. And so an immediate question I have to mind is both, I think of you articulated the importance of this agenda, and I think it's run through the entirety of the festival, and certainly from the work I get to do in my real life, especially around COVID response. One of the big challenges that we see at the moment, and Richard, you alluded to this, is how disconnected we have been in addressing the issues. And so there's a short-term response to deaths, and there's a longer term response to the inequalities that COVID has shone a spotlight on. And it shows you, just even in the context of a health pandemic, how interconnected things are. So my immediate question is, why is this so important now? And perhaps I can come to you, Richard, because I know you've started picking at this slightly with your words so far. Over to you.
Thank you, Nizam. I think what we're seeing right now is that we're at such a critical point in our story, our journey, our history. And we really need to think again about how we design and learn and then go into the world and work and connect in ways that will enable us to be well individually and collectively. And I loved what you said earlier, Keith, about this idea of community and opportunities to build community within schools, for example, but beyond schools, finding partners in learning that bring that learning to life and putting it in this wider context of how do we learn to live sustainably into the future, because we can see that the trends are going the wrong way. You know, our biodiversity, as an example, is declining, and we're in this mass extinction, the Anthropocene. So how do we reverse that? And again, just this play on words, or not even play, but reference to words, this idea of healing or heal in health, that when we are truly healthy, what we are doing is creating processes that heal. And we see that in our own lives. And obviously you've referenced the pandemic and the importance of health. But we also see it in terms of nature and the wider world, and how we look after that and make sure that that's healthy. So we've got to pull together all these different elements of health and well-being and look at them personally, collectively, and in relationship to the wider world. And I think if we can do that and put that at the heart of what we're learning, like a golden thread that runs through all our work, then we'll be moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Richard.
I follow on from that.
Of course.
I think all of that is very urgent and very important, and part of that is actually that we're assimilating and struggling with what the internet is and what it can do, and here we are having this wonderful conversation by video conferencing, which is fantastic. But you know, at the same time, we've also got the internet driving people sometimes further into silos, into their social media bubbles, when they spend their time ganging up on the people in the other bubble. And there's an enormous potential actually here for joining things up, helping people to understand different perspectives, getting communities built around the globe, connecting humanity in a new and deeper way, as well as a possibility of that failing and driving people apart and polarizing. So that is another big part of the task we face. And if we get that right, then building a global consciousness of the needs of the world and its environmental problems can be part of what happens through that. But yes, I think we live in very exciting and dangerous and difficult and times full of opportunities.
And I think you make a really, really important point about the online world and what we're seeing. We've referenced COVID, the disinformation that we're seeing, the fake news around, say, vaccines, for example, and how quickly that can move. And it does speak to a conditioning of a people, because ultimately, I think, and this goes back to the young people conversation that we started having. But before I go and explore that angle, I think I shared this with you previously, my favorite word actually for many years has been holistic. But it's a word that's been beaten out of me. And I gave this example when I used to work in quality assurance in higher education, which is I think respect to colleagues who work in the world of quality assurance, but it's not as exciting perhaps as a profession as I thought it was going to be when I first joined, intentionally so. And so I used to use the word holistic in my documents, and my manager at the time would do a search and replace function every time I wrote the word holistic in there, which spoke actually to a misunderstanding of the word holistic, because I absolutely would see the problems in this context as one conceptually whole issue, whereas actually the way in which she had been conditioned was to look at our particular function. And I think it speaks to wider society, because when you hear the word holistic, there's a tension there, because there are things that I don't know, and that makes me very uncomfortable. And we live in a time when we're expected to know things. And so I'd love to get a sense from you of the challenges that you have faced in your work around promoting this interdisciplinary and this polymathic, this holistic worldview that we all are striving towards, that we all know ultimately is a good thing. What are the challenges that you have faced, and perhaps also how have you overcome them practically? Keith, can I come to you first?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, being in a Cambridge college is a huge privilege because you have people from all different subjects living alongside each other, and we have a theatre and music facilities and an art gallery, and people play sports, and there's a library, and all these things potentially join together, but at the same time they're in their narrow little fields. And one of the most exciting things about university life is when people start talking to each other across the subjects, and talking about what it all means, and they can be really nervous of doing that. And the whole idea that it might all add up to something greater that takes them out of their area of expertise is a difficult one. But part of what I can do as a chaplain is to run discussion groups where people start to do that. And every now and again, it really takes off, and people have the most amazing conversations, which is what I remember from my own student days. But yeah, there are real challenges to that sense that things can fit together like that. If you just float the idea that life has a meaning, a lot of people think that that's quite funny. It's absurd, you know. It's 42, or it's a Monty Python film or something. It's not something you can talk about anymore. But when you press people on that, actually, we do know what it means when life is meaningful and when it isn't. We know what it feels like if you come home at the end of the day and you feel that you've helped somebody and you've done something that's going to make a difference somewhere or other. And we know what it feels like to have a day when it's just been empty of anything that matters at all. We've got a kind of facility for a faculty for tuning in to things that are meaningful, and yet somehow we don't want to talk about that and talk about life as a whole as meaningful, and when it becomes more meaningful when we're helping each other and building community and civilization and enjoying the beauty of nature and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of nervousness about those themes, but there are ways of kindly inviting people to explore them.
Thanks, Keith. Richard, do you have any examples? I'm sure many, given the fact that you nationally try to deploy this exceptional program.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question to ask. And I was thinking then when you were just talking, Keith, that this, going back to this reference to Ubiquity University, I saw that they had done a study on what are the skills we're going to need for the 21st century. And the 3 top skills that they identified all begin with C: communication and good communication skills, collaboration and how we can work well together, and creativity and how we use our creative thinking and expression and design in the processes in which we learn. I think, coming back to your question, Nizam, we live in a world of measure, and that world of measure is very dominant, and often it creates a fear. People worry that if they don't get the results or the grades or the performance up to the standards that it needs to be, that in some way they'll be criticized or challenged, or in its worst case, almost humiliated by that. So I think we have to look beyond that to that other word that you referenced, Keith, of meaning. And how do we get a better balance between acknowledging that there'll always be some kind of measure, some kind of assessment process, and that's a good thing. I mean, we want evaluation and assessment through how we learn and how we develop our thinking. But on the other side, what's the meaning of this? And someone said the other day, you know, what does this word learning mean? And my response was, that's a good question, but we also need to be asking, what are we learning for? What is this learning helping us to do or make sense of, that has that lovely sense of meaning? So I think the challenge, certainly from an education perspective, is how do we get the balance between acknowledging the importance of meaning and progress, measure and progress, but doing it in a way that gives our students a real meaning in what they do, so that they can see the goal of their work as more than just a grade. I remember speaking to a student who'd left primary and gone to secondary, and I said, "How are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm a 7B in my English and I'm an 8A in my maths." And I said, no, I want to know, how are you? So just trying to get that balance feels really important.
That's so true.
Go for it.
I
Please,
really
Keith.
couldn't agree more. I mean, having mentioned what university is like, life is like when it works well, the way it gets so overshadowed by exams, and for many people that's just a whole experience of anxiety and terror that drowns everything else out. And we have gone too far with our focus on tests. But people come to university as people have been trained year after year to get better and better at tests, and are just in a state of high adrenaline. When's the next test coming up? And it's, yeah, developing a more rounded sense of learning as building us as people in a way that can't ever be reduced to a number, but with a love of inquiry. And yeah, there is a balance there that we've lost.
And let me ask you both a more conceptual question, which is, I think, and me and Richard have certainly spoken about this, where we are training young people at primary school level to have this holistic thinking. They're almost too advanced when they enter a secondary school system. And I think I asked you the question, are we setting them up to fail almost, because the structure around isn't designed for them to do well? And I guess the question here is, we have evolved into a system which is highly empirical in nature, of course, and therefore what polymathic thinking has become is also almost a preserve of those who have the ability to prosper with a low opportunity cost. And by that I mean you can be polymathic and the costs are lower, whereas if you perhaps come from a more humble background, you think you have to go and earn your job, you have to go do well in a degree and then go work your way through the corporate ladder or whatever. How do we reconcile this individual track of promoting polymathic thinking, and how do we allow a polymathic thinking / a holistic worldview to be embedded in our system? So say at a university level, or say a school-wide level. So I'm talking about leadership here. So Keith, I'd love to get a sense from you around university leadership, because I think universities are key to this. And then Richard around schools leadership. So I'd love to hear from you, Keith, perhaps around your role as a fellow and how university leadership can do more to systemically facilitate this kind of thinking.
That is a very good question. Yes. I mean, with a system that is so focused on getting people through narrow subjects and getting them to exam results, people like me sort of sit alongside that and try to add to it. I think we have to do a lot more telling of stories about lives lived well, rather than reducing people to numbers, because reducing people to numbers misses the point of them. And that both means the great Leonardos of the past who've had lives lived well that have been polymathic, but it also means celebrating the people from very ordinary, humble backgrounds who've started to develop a range of skills. It means, yeah, rejoicing in the achievements of our students in a way that goes beyond just whether they've met the targets of a specific curriculum, but actually enjoying it when they've had a conversation with somebody doing another subject and something sparked off between the two of them, or they've linked that with a visit to the art gallery or something. So there's something about the ways we talk about each other and the things that we celebrate on our websites and in our publications and so on, which I think could go a lot further. But it is a big task.
Certainly is. Richard.
Yeah, it is a big task. And I'm interested in this idea of what quality education looks like. It's one of the SDG goals for number 4. And we're now needing to consider what is quality education in the world right now. And we need to give ourselves a bit more space, I think, to explore that. And if you have a very narrow curriculum and a very narrow focus on the measure of that curriculum, then it will be difficult to give that time and space at all levels, at a leadership level, right down to the way that our children and young people learn in a classroom, or ideally outside the classroom sometimes do. But I think in a positive way, we are seeing that change is beginning to happen, because if you take the PISA testing and league tables, global league tables, they are realizing now that this very narrow focus on just the academic is causing a lot of a real sense of lack of well-being, and it's having some fairly dramatic consequences. So they are, and OECD are looking now at at the measures of well-being. And if you look around the world, there are countries like New Zealand, like Finland, I think, and Scotland and Wales with their Future Generations Act, looking at well-being. So I think we have to start to shift the focus away from the measure side to a measure or a way of working out, evaluating what does well-being look like through this process of learning. And I think if we can find that, again, it's this balance, find the balance between the two, putting well-being and the health of our students and indeed our teaching staff at the center of what we do. Whilst acknowledging that we of course want good progress and we want things to develop in the right ways within that domain, then I think we can do something really positive from this.
I could not agree more, Richard. As you know, I spent 10 plus years working in a youth charity setting, and what we find, and this goes back to your whole and health perspective, if I think about the impact of just this pandemic and the last few years in the UK alone on young people, the mental health component is almost seen separately from the physical health, which of course it isn't. So I think we're seeing that firsthand. Thank you to those who've sent in comments and questions. Bridget Knight says the balance between measure and meaning is so exceptionally important for the future of our world, which of course we absolutely agree with. And we have Sir Anthony Selton from the University of Buckingham. Thank you for your question. Well known to the Harmony Project and to Richard, of course. If these truths are so evident to us, why are they not to those globally who dictate what is studied in schools? Richard, I think that's for you.
Well, I'll have to speak to Anthony at length about that separately, but in answer to his question, I wonder whether it's this fact that we have leaders in the world, many of whom have come from that mindset of separateness, and they maybe are not seeing things in the joined up way that we're highlighting, or the truths of these universal principles of life. I think we have to really consider now how we almost, I don't want to be patronizing about it, but how we help them and help each other to recontextualize things and say, hang on a minute here, there are some really important messages around what life looks like when it is well. And that's what we have to put at the center, at the heart of everything that we do. And if that's our goal, then everything that we do, the Prince has just released this Terra Carta, and the key message is about health for people and health for planet. And so if we put that as the driver of everything and the measure of everything, then I think we can start to create something that ultimately for everyone is better and for everything is better.
And Keith, just to give you an opportunity to come in on that question of if these truths are so evident to us, why are they not clearly dictated to in what we study or what we aspire towards?
Yes, I mean, the whole education process from childhood to university is like one of those great oil tankers that it takes a long while to change direction in. And you know, I really like the idea that there's a demand from the world for people who understand community and communication, connectedness, and so on. And if that could feed down more through the system from the top end, as well as the kind of things that Richard is talking about coming through from the primary school end. But I think there has to be a strong effort both to communicate the kind of skills that people actually need to thrive in life, and to gear universities towards producing people who are able to have or acquire those skills, and schools that can then feed towards the universities. We're stuck in a lot of habitual ways of doing things at all levels, I guess, that it's quite hard to change.
Absolutely. And to encourage those who are listening, and please do send in your questions and your comments, and I'm sure Keith and Richard will be delighted to receive them. I'd love to explore, Keith, something that you started mentioning, and I'm also piecing my own thoughts about this, which is in the universal search of the meaning of the cosmos. Partly one of the things that we started doing as a race of people is using the sciences, using industry, and the Reformation and everything else, where we went towards a mechanical view of the cosmos. And I'm almost wondering to myself, with that being so successful, and you know, I mean, ultimately we live in a society, because I'm trying to understand why is it that a lot of the folks I perhaps work with, who I try and encourage a more holistic worldview of the issues and the problems that we're trying to solve, and we use language, right? We will adapt a language of empiricism to try and incentivize people to join us in this polymathic thinking approach. And how dangerous is that, to adopt the language to try and incentivize people, as opposed to moving them towards the language of holistic or polymathic or interdisciplinary thinking? I'll give you a tangible example. When I think of the worlds that I've worked in around corporate social responsibility, it started off in the world of, hey, big corporates, you should do this because it's the right thing to do. And what you found was very few of them, and I'm perhaps being unfair, did the right thing. But when you started couching it in the language of, this is good, you know, this is good for your business, there's a business plan and a business approach to the environment, which we now call ESG. And what I find is a muddling of the two. And I'm trying to figure out whether we have the best of both or the worst of both at the moment in this approach. And so perhaps it's a bit of a gray question, but in trying to incentivize people to move towards a direction of a historical approach, of course, they see the world in the way they have been conditioned to, which has been successful. This empirical approach has been successful. We are, you know, as a human species, more successful, more evolved, more technologically advanced. We've just, in the space of less than a year, created a vaccine, which up until, you know, this crisis was not imaginable. So with that in mind, how do we reconcile the different ways of thinking to move people and nudge people towards a way where they can understand and appreciate this, you know, this everything approach, and moving away from this? And I like the way Richard put it, this mindset of separateness. Separateness has been successful. So how do we move away from it?
Thank you. A wonderful set of questions there. I mean, I think our culture is really confused about science. I mean, a lot of people really don't like it at all. They don't want to study it. They find it intimidating. They find it frightening. They don't really want to talk to scientists. They actually prefer to live in a realm which is about friendship and relationships and enjoying lots of aspects of life in a way that is really not particularly science-based. But there's this very intimidating sense that it's the science which is true because it's got this experimental clarity behind it. We can see the technology it produces. We know that the microwave works and so on. And we've got this rather strange situation in which it's quite normal, therefore, for people to ignore science and live lives that are based around much more personal kinds of things whilst being intimidated by it. And I guess I'd want to try and broaden out what we understand evidence to be. So some of our evidence is scientific in the sense that it's measurable. So we can have a discussion about what the melting point of lead is, because we can, in labs around the world, melt some lead and check we've all got the same answers. But also there's the evidence we have from what we find meaningful. There's the evidence of our response to beauty. And we tend to dismiss that because we say it's subjective, it's in the eye of the beholder and so on. And therefore our culture has tended to retreat from those things and to say that they're not as real as the melting point of lead or whatever. But I do think there's a conversation we can have with each other about that wider range of things that we experience, including harmony and goodness and beauty and meaning. And that actually in a way is the same kind of thing that the scientists are talking about. It's just that they've got things that they can measure more precisely. The other stuff is real as well. Where that gets us to with incentivizing people to behave well and companies to behave well, I'm not quite sure. But I think there is something also about taking seriously the idea of love as something that's not just private and frivolous, but the idea that to love the good, to love the health of the planet, to love our communities is something to celebrate and to enjoy, and that we can't just reduce that down to this company must meet this target in order to look good on its annual report, but actually that there should be a delight we take in the flourishing of each other and of the world.
Keith, Thank you, and thank you for articulating an answer which would suggest I asked a far more clearer question than I did. I appreciate that. Richard, I hope you were able to discern something of a question from my comments, and would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm still trying to work out the question. I think we have to now really see the opportunities of bringing people together around where we are going, not to see it as an us and them, not to see the division in this, but to see ways in which we can build relationships and partnerships around the future that we all want to see. And of course, you know, adults working and leading in big business and so on, many of them will have children or relatives who are from the next generation. And we know that we have to consider them and consider the generation after that and the one after that. I think this long-term vision of what we are doing and its impact and implications for the future generations down the line is such an important question, particularly now when we know the consequences of getting it wrong. I think one example of that is coming back to your point on ESGs and business and how that's working. I think it would be fascinating to see how business can become more integrated into the world of education in the right way, so that they can listen to one another. And young people have often got fascinating perspectives on things. They see things differently. They've got a new eye on the world. And of course, often they have an intuitive sense of things. And sometimes that can be lost when we get very caught up in our world of work. So I think if we can find ways of opening up conversations around these inquiries, these questions that we need to be searching for and through, then maybe we can benefit everyone. And of course, you know, we're not saying if we want to create a sustainable future, it's going to be at the cost of the economy and people are going to have lesser quality of lives. It should mean that we have a better quality of life because the world in which we live and the relationships that we have are richer for it. So yeah, I think we have to look at it in a very positive light as something that will be to the benefit of all.
Thanks, Richard. Liz Moody makes a comment, which is often I think we frame learning in terms of the inputs rather than thinking about the outcomes. Perhaps if we concentrated on developing more integrated or holistic outcomes, we could start to address the way that these are achieved beyond skills for now, domain knowledge, which I think absolutely is echoed by everybody here. Alex asks, thanks Keith and Richard, do you not think that educational change will remain difficult whilst we continue to have a socioeconomic system that prioritizes productivity above all else? Richard?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes is the very simple answer, and that is our challenge. We have to find the right way of acknowledging those elements around measure and ultimately leading into productivity, but starting to shift things. I think all of this is about shift. We can't, realistically, as much as some of us would like to have radical change and revolution, we actually have to be very sensitive around how do we shift things and move things to a better place. And I'm going to give you a very simple example. I remember when I was a head teacher, we would always have learning objectives, and learning objectives felt really quite detached and impersonal and something that you might not really be able to get your teeth into. And we changed that to questions. And questions felt much more direct. It's I'm asking you something, or let's look at something together and think it through. And just through that shift of process from an objective to a question, it felt more engaging, more inclusive, more owned. And suddenly the learning started to move into a different place. So yeah, we've got to be very smart at finding how we do that, but it's a big challenge.
Keith, any comments?
Yes, I agree. That's quite a challenging one, and it comes down to what we mean by productivity. If productivity is your ability to make people buy something they don't actually need, and which breaks after a year, so they have to get another one, then that's very much skews what we understand human life is all about. If instead of productivity we have a wider understanding of human well-being and what that means, that would certainly help. But yes, a big task.
It's almost like you were in my head yesterday, Keith. It's how I felt about my phone, which has stopped working recently. Richard, you had something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to think about this in terms of this work of harmony, because just looking at that beautiful picture of Vitruvian Man behind you, Keith, and the circle, and we know that life and nature works in cycles. It's cyclical. It has periods of growth and abundance, but it also has periods of dieback and decay, and then periods of rest, restoration, regeneration, and rebirth. And I think we have to be really clear that we know this, we live in a world of finite resources. So productivity can't be endless, because the model of nature teaches us that it doesn't work like that. So we have to have limit. We have to see that natural systems are self-limiting and self-regulating. And how do we do that? And that opens up another fascinating question around, the consumerist culture versus perhaps some of the more spiritual dimensions that you referenced earlier, Keith, and how we find a right way of learning to live that recognizes the importance of living within this idea of limit.
An incredible segue as well, Richard. And I think that the point that you just made about quantifying even what we know costs that are not measured currently. And I know we have industries being created around the circular economy for us to be able to measure the impact on the environment and the costs of the environment doing its work on our behalf, which we don't, which of course encourages a holistic worldview and a thinking so that we can fully calculate our presence in the world, practically speaking. But you've alluded to something there, which I did want to touch on, which is, and I think about this current context of certainly in the UK, and I'm sure those of us who are joining from around the world, we've spent the best part of the last year pretty much in lockdown. And not just lockdown, but surrounded by a health pandemic, which has had costs from a health perspective, from an education perspective, where young people aren't going to schools, from an economic perspective, where people in particular industries are suffering more than most. And it's posed real existential questions about why we exist. And certainly growing up in a neoliberal capitalist society, you learn that you work, you become productive, you earn, and you go home and you rest and you go back and do it again. And it's allowed us to fit into that frame. And I think where we are as a civilization is at an inflection point now, where we are asking fairly deep and profound questions about the meaning of our existence, more so than any other time in perhaps recent history, for sure. And I wonder, with that in mind, and I hope you won't mind me asking this question from a holistic worldview perspective, in terms of deriving a source of why we exist, from your own perspectives, I'd love to get a sense of your own personal journeys, if you are able to share where that has come from, and whether it's been difficult because of what we've just described, a 500-year history where we've had a more scientific explanation to the cosmos. And so the way in which perhaps we now manifest our yearning for meaning changes. It could be, it could be faith on one end in terms of religion and a body of text. It might be through acts of good service and practice that we do without any form of deity on top. But it seems to me that we are all yearning, and that yearning from a spiritual perspective is demarcated in the very silos that we describe because of the way in which the world has moved towards. So I'll give you a really practical example to bring this to life. One of my best friends and I, we regularly go for yoga. And I find yoga to be hugely spiritual, which I then connect into my faith practice. But my close friend is deeply somebody who is of the belief that there is no deity and there's no God, and absolutely and of no faith. And that's of course absolutely okay. But there seems to be a tension where we can't even engage, and there's no reconciliation of difference, if you will. And I know we've talked about these silos that we're creating. So in this quest of meaning of life, I'd love to get a sense from you both about how you have allowed that to manifest for your own journeys, and how that extends to the work that you do. Obviously, I'm going to go to Keith first.
That's a wonderful set of questions. Thank you. I mean, my own journey is one from an atheist upbringing via an interest in physics and astronomy, eventually through to becoming a Christian and a Christian minister. And within that, I've found lots of things in the Christian tradition that absolutely sustain me and help me, but also a sense of frustration about how theology often hides in its own little silos and niches, and the questions that I raise in my book are things that actually most Christians are a bit surprised about, or a bit amazed that we can even tackle. And so faith tends to adopt these little areas of specialism, like we're the ones who know how to go to heaven when we die, or we have some particular niche kind of spirituality, or there's some one particular ethical issue we want to focus on, and broadening that out into a way that connects with life as a whole and which other people can talk about is what needs to happen. And it's the kind of thing that I suppose one reason I've stayed a college chaplain for 17 years is the kind of thing you can do on a small scale in a little community like that, but which I would love to see happening on a wider scale via discussions like this. But yeah, everybody gets scared and runs back for their little niche that they know about. And some people's perception of goodness is very much a religious one, and some people's conception of goodness and experience of goodness very much comes from a source that seems secular, and finding the universal experiences that we share and trying to explore those together is a hugely important task. But it comes down to lots and lots of conversations, I think, in ways that involve agreeing not to get angry with each other, which we're all scared of, because that's the thing that tends to happen on Twitter or in news headlines about religion and politics.
And forgive me, Richard, but Keith, on that, can we get to a universal holistic worldview without an ability for us to, like you say, have those many conversations together? Is that a necessary part of the journey for us to get to a point where we can all get to a stage of a holistic worldview where we don't feel the source of inspiration for our worldview that is holistic is in any way better or less than somebody else's source of inspiration for their holistic worldview?
I mean, I think, yes. So part of having a holistic worldview ought to be an ability to talk to people from all perspectives. And I think you can have a gentle humility that says, well, this is how things seem to me. This is what I've found that makes sense of things. I haven't understood the entirety of the world and all its cultures, and I'd love to hear how things seem from other perspectives. So it's not a case of some clever people figure out the ultimate truth and then inflict it on everybody else. It's more that we start to feel safe around each other to talk about the things that actually are important. And that may well not immediately converge on some great new shared approach to everything, but if we can at least get better at talking about the things that matter, that will be hugely important.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Keith. Richard, your thoughts?
So I was thinking just then about this word listening and the importance of listening, and obviously that has a very personal element to it, listening to yourself, understanding who you are, what's your place in the world, what do you love? I mean, you know, this idea of being in your element. What are the things that enable you to be in your element when you feel so happy in your role, in whatever it is in the world? Of course, there's the listening to others and the importance of listening to others, coming back to Keith's point, and listening to those different perspectives. We have to, as we move forward, really value each other's perspectives and listen with that lovely sense of humility, as you say. And not to be too quick to be angry or confrontational. And you know, we've had some pretty bad examples of that in the world recently. But actually, I think if we can listen to one another well and appreciate what we bring to that and see it as a good thing, this idea of diversity and diverse perspectives, I think that's really important. And then this other element of listening to the world. And what is, you know, a lot of people have been saying right now, partly because they've had more time in nature maybe than they would otherwise have had because of lockdown and so on. You know, they've reconnected to the world around them, and they've started to listen and notice things in a way that maybe they hadn't before. So how do we listen to the world? What's the world telling us right now? And what does that, where do we go from that? Because we don't want to go right back to where we were before, and living our lives in this sort of fairly manic fashion, doing too much, consuming too much, fairly relentlessly. We're all realizing that actually this very difficult time of COVID and the pandemic has actually also taught us about things that we're realizing are quite important to us, about just slowing down and trying to value things in different ways, relationships particularly. So I think if we can put listening at the heart of this process from here on, around this worldview that we all want to create, this holistic worldview, I think that will put us in very good stead.
It's wonderfully said, Richard. Thank you. This is a last opportunity to encourage those who are listening to send in questions, thoughts, or remarks, and we're very close to the end. So I wanted to ask you both a couple of final, quite practical questions, if I may, which is, in terms of hope, we've talked about hope, we've talked about love. In terms of going towards a holistic worldview, is there an example that you can give that gives you the greatest hope that this is happening in this regard? It could be an individual, it could be a project, it could be anything. I'd love to get a sense from you of what gives you hope and gives you that sense of, yes, this is exactly what we're trying to do and what we're trying to create. Richard.
I was thinking you're going to go to Keith first.
I'll come to you.
no thinking process there. I think, you know, coming from my place of work now, this work of harmony, which has fascinated me for several years, it feels a really lovely way of exploring where we go next. And my hope is that that message of harmony, which can be applied across all cultures, all religions, all perspectives, it's a wholly inclusive way of seeing and understanding the world. I think if we can have that kind of approach to where we go, and then, as you say, very practically look at what does that mean in reality. So my example at the beginning was that in education, it means we need to join up our ways of learning more. We need to see connections and how things work together, not separately. We need to nurture these skills of collaboration and communication and creative purpose. That when we do that, and we go from the sort of big picture thinking of the theory and the philosophy into the very practical details of what does that look like, I think we can be very encouraged by what we can do. And my hope with this work of harmony, as I said right at the start, inspired by the Prince's book, Harmony, A New Way of Looking at Our World, I hope that can offer something which really is new and refreshing and exciting and hopeful.
Richard, thank you. Keith.
I mean, what gives me hope, and I'm sure Richard would say the same thing, is young people, actually, and they are an endless delight to work with. And actually, it is great when another new generation comes in and they don't have the baggage of the previous ones. And I do find that the students I see now, compared with the ones I saw 15 years ago, have less of a kind of set of baggage about things to do with faith and religion and big philosophies and ideologies and so on. And there is more of a sort of gentle openness, and they're not coming with already a sense of things that they're angry about and closed to, and a sense that they're this group rather than the other group. More of a sense that actually there's an openness to things that they know they haven't explored properly yet and are wanting to. So yeah, I do think that each generation actually brings hope here. And I do feel optimistic about the ones I see now.
Absolutely, could not agree more. And I think Bridget and Anne in our comments also agree. Bridget says, I think it's so refreshing that we are talking in this way and tackling issues some groups, religious groups included, or perhaps especially, shy away from, and we need more of this. And what an exceptionally good point about our interdependence and respect and diversity and listening to the world. And Anne says what Keith has just said, and Richard too, about listening to each other, discover and question, is the feeling I've had throughout this festival. Likewise, Anne, I completely agree. And a few takeaways from me from this conversation is I'm inspired by both of you and your work, and actually Keith, absolutely young people. I think the ability for us, for young people in particular, who have no, they've not been institutionalized by the world or by institutions, and coming through, say the things that we often don't, we get used to not saying the things that we really want to say, and young people don't have that filter, of course, which is the biggest blessing. And a couple of other takeaways that I've taken from this conversation, which has been so rich, the health and the language, the relationship between health and whole, how we design and learn. I really love the ubiquity, communication, collaboration, creativity, and the need for us to see connections more together and not separately, all have really resonated, and absolutely been a fantastic conversation. I want to give you both the opportunity to share anything that you may have wanted to, but I haven't given you the opportunity to, so my apologies. But if there's anything else that you want to leave our audience with, by pearls of wisdom, or an insight that perhaps you've had throughout this conversation, or something that you've just been reminded of. So a last opportunity to share something before we close our session today. Keith, perhaps I can come to you first.
I think all I want to say is thank you. This has been so rewarding, and I think this kind of conversation is an example of what we need to be doing. I don't have another profound thought to give beyond that, but I would love to see this kind of project grow and flourish more and more. I think it's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Richard.
Yeah, can I echo what Keith said? It's been a wonderful opportunity to share thinking together and to appreciate and value one another's perspectives on things. And we've got some pretty big challenges ahead of us at all levels, and we need to think very carefully about them. But I think if we can work together and have this sense of collaboration and listening and communication, and then take action with considered purpose, to really think about what we're doing and where we're going, and to keep reflecting and evaluating, how is this working? It's a constant conversation and dialogue that is open and honest, but seeks the good. And Keith, you've referenced this word good and goodness so often, and I think that's what we should all be doing now. And it certainly is, coming back to the point around young people, it's what a lot of young people want to see too, and we can be really encouraged by that. So that word courage is right at the heart of this, isn't it? The French word cœur, and taking courage that we can do this, and we need to be very measured in what we do in the right way to achieve that.
Keith, Richard, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute joy and honor to be able to curate this conversation. This festival, of course, has been curated by the DaVinci Network. Please do support the DaVinci Network Kickstarter campaign for more activism around this topic of building a holistic worldview. There are many more events to come. Please do check them out. But otherwise, it's been wonderful to hear from you both, and very much look forward to continue our conversation in the future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.